morning. And it is a committee meeting of one committee member today, so kind of unusual, but we'll forge ahead, and we have a lot to work on today. And I'll just go through the agenda. We're glad to have James Krall here from Mountain Home Demonstration State Forest, and that's our first item on the agenda is an update on the Mountain Home Management Plan update. It was great that we had the field trip last fall, I believe it was, to get a tour of the forest, so that it's always super helpful to have that preceding this step in the process. So I'll start off with our executive officer to introduce it, and then CAL FIRE staff, including Mr. Krall, to kind of update us.
Check the microphone. Okay, is it broadcasting? It is. So I will remind everybody once again that we are broadcasting this meeting through the online.
Oh, thank you for this. I was looking on here.
Okay. Is there anybody online right now for this? 4, 3. So I would remind everybody, since we do have participants online, that if you're going to speak this morning, please come to the podium and speak so that people on the webinar can sufficiently hear the conversation and comment if they feel appropriate. My introduction for the first topic this morning is rather brief. As you indicated, Chairman Andre, that Mr. Krall, a friend of mine and colleague, is here this morning to present some information pertaining to the Mountain Home Demonstration Forest. The forest, we have 2 plans before you this morning, obviously being Mountain Home and Boggs Demonstration, and those plans are being presented in conformance with board policy. And I did not include a copy of the policies in the binder today. I do have them with me, so if you have specific questions pertaining to either the policies as they pertain to these plans, I'll be happy to provide comments. That's all I really have to say this morning before I turn the podium over to Mr. Krall or Chief Reichman. Either one?
Yeah.
Come on up.
All right. Thank you both for being here, Chief. And
thanks for having me here this morning. Appreciate it. So I'm glad you brought up. I'm glad you brought up the tour, because really nothing has changed since then, with the exception of my 4 seasonal staff that I had are no longer there. So I have been continuing to manage the forest through crisis, you might say, taking care of things that pop up as they come. Shortly after the tour with the board, Executive Officer Diaz and I spoke a few times and shared some email communications as to a relatively short list of changes to the management plan. Something that I thought I would be able to accomplish from that time period now, but proven myself that I haven't been able to do it. And some of it is there's three of the 8 items that we were discussing were somewhat contingent upon the completion of the continuous forest inventory, which my staff and some help from Sacramento did. That's been done. The data has been tabulated and put in digital format and made available here in Sacramento for the biometrician to start doing the number crunching and prepare a report for us. And that was one of there are 3 items in here that require that. Item number 1 would have been the new estimate of standing inventory growth based on continuous forest inventory. I was going to do some discussion item 2 about the widespread tree mortality and its management implications on the forest. And then there was another item, I apologize for that one right off the top of my head. Oh, discussion item number 7. I had spoke to you about the implementation of a new fixed radius plot, continuous forest inventory methodology, as opposed to the current variable radius plot. For some obvious reasons, I think you guys saw some of that at our last stop on the forest. The sheer size of some of these trees, it just doesn't make sense to do a variable radius plot. I mean, the trees are in and they really don't have any they really don't have any impact on the other trees that are in the ground. So I can't provide you with something that I don't have. The other changes are relatively non-substantive. It doesn't, it's more information only. I think I've captured that in my responses to the 8 items that Diaz and I agreed about. Not making excuses, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me to provide you with a 100+ page document that's going to have some significant holes in it that really will speak to the management of the forest. So in essence, I'm asking for an extension of time indefinitely until the bionutrition can produce the information that I need to further go down the revision road with the management plan, or just allow the current management plan that has been our guiding secret document to extend for the remaining period of its 10-year life cycle.
Okay.
The plan was prepared in 2010. The board had decided that we were going to stagger the different forests, so they're never reviewing more than one management plan a year, which makes a lot of sense. I think all the state forest managers agree. That put me at year 7 for the 2017 revision. So really, I think all I'm asking for is, give me that additional 3 years before we reevaluate this. The drought condition hasn't changed, but at least I can make the management plan current to the current data set, if that makes sense, if you will.
Makes sense. What's the staffing situation for meeting the proposed extension timeline? I mean, you have a
current staffing situation.
I know you have a wide range of duties, and it's hard to, I'm writing a management plan myself right now, and you get pulled off for this and that and everything, and the continuity of, can be tough sometimes. So I know there's been a team approach on some state forests, demo forests.
We did some of that in the 2010 management plan. My plan at that time really was to try to make a very comprehensive plan that touched upon all the little subtle nuances and needs of the forest at that particular time. But having only been the manager there for less than 2 years, I've learned a lot more about that forest. That the changes that I do make, I think, will really speak to more of the general situation of the forest, because there have been some changes. The recreation management portion of the plan in the forest has changed dramatically. We did 2 green sales early on when I got there that made a lot of sense at the time, and then the bark beetle epidemic has basically dictated how we're going to harvest the forest for a while, just to try to keep the insect populations down or somewhat in check. And there are a couple other things that we're working on. We received an appraisal for some adjacent property that would make a nice addition to the state forest, and I'm still considering a much bigger land exchange proposal with the Sequoia National Forest, but they just lost their supervisor, who's soon to be replaced, and he's got to get his feet under him before we can sit down and have a discussion.
So that's the 262 acre.
The 262 is private.
Yeah. No, yeah, that's where you have the appraisal for.
Yes.
And do you need board support for moving something through there, that expansion, or do you have to wait for the management plan to show how it,
Well, I think board support is important for anything that's done on the state forest.
But how it fits in with the context of how would it improve management and meet the goals of the current plan?
Well, it will allow us to take some property that immediately adjoins us. Not only are these properties strategically located in somewhat of an airshed, so to speak. We get a lot of diurnal wind movement up through one of these properties, which has in essence been subject to almost 100% mortality. It was a nice forest, but there's a lot of mortality in there. Most of the pine species were harvested off that property about 15 or 20 years ago. with the majority of what's left being cedar. They're dead, but they're recently dead, so they're still holding some value. And the appraisal, because the trees are dead, they found that there was no timber value there. So the purchase price will, in essence, be reduced somewhat if we move relatively quickly on this thing and go in there and rehab it, turn it back into a forest. I mean, that's really what it needs. Otherwise, succession is going to run its course, and we may have a brush field adjacent to well-managed land on our side of the property. That's basically, going another quarter mile below us and picking up that land. And then there's an 80-acre piece that came for sale over the course of the last year or so with the passing of the primary landowner there, which does have some timber value on it. I don't have those numbers with me, I apologize, but that would make a nice addition to the upper part. Whether it's maintained and managed as part of Mountain Home State Forest or is included as an additional 80 acres for a subsequent exchange over the Forest Service, which may make better sense in the future.
Maybe Chief Reich can answer this, but how is an acquisition like this funded? It has to be in the budget. I mean, what would be a source of funds for this a 260 acre addition to a state forest,
Yeah, so good morning, Member Aubrey, Matthew Reichman, CAL FIRE. That's correct. Funds for this would either come out of the state forest, the budget as we call it, which are funds that are generated through revenues, timber harvest on the state forest, and then possibly through the general fund. That's the challenge, is the funding available to make that type of acquisition occur. And then obviously, we go through Public Works Board, DGS, the same process we would for any type of land acquisition. So yeah, funding is the big challenge, big hurdle.
Sounds like an opportunity. So in terms of, I have a few more questions, but I think it makes sense for an extension, no doubt.
Thank you.
That's just me. In terms of research going on, and you have your management plan, and then has to be flexible or adaptive to some changes, right? And sometimes inventories don't always coincide with but you need them to inform your planning process. But
Correct.
So how, if you're updating your inventory mid-cycle, I mean that could occur, right? I mean, and you just make some amendments or adjustments that wouldn't throw it out of whack with your objectives or CEQA even, perhaps, right? Does it always have to coincide with the management plan update in terms of the new inventory?
It's not required, but it certainly makes sense that it works that way. The 2010 approved plan, I was working off of some relatively, I don't want to say old data, but it wasn't immediately current data. But the dynamics and composition of the forest had not changed dramatically in the interim. I mean, there was very little management being done on the forest for 5 to 7 year period of time before I got there. So the CFI data that was done during that period kind of held true. The growth would have been the same. There was no harvesting done, so all we were doing was banking inventory. But since the beetle outbreak, we have been logging somewhere in the neighborhood of 2.5 to 3 million board feet of primarily pine. So the species composition has changed dramatically, which, I was kind of on track to do a lot of white fir reduction in the understory to try to get somewhat of a pre-European settlement condition back. And in essence, we've hydrated, unintentionally hydrated, but just to capture the mortality. So we're kind of back to a very white fir dominated forest that's going to require a lot of work. And until the beetle activity slows down, it's going to be hard to determine where we're going to go in the future, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Are there any new opportunities for research identified by the EMC or others on the?
Since the tour,
Yeah.
since the board tour,
Because I did see some canopy forest researcher sent some photos out, and he was in one of the big trees on Latour. I thought that's where they were. So UC, it was Berkeley, Cal, PhD students or something.
yeah, some of the mortality related stuff. Yeah, Dr. Battles and Jody Axelson, they did some plots at the forest this year. I believe they're going to be continuing on with some of those plots this summer. We have been approached, Dr. Ng and Professor Sarah Bisbing from University of Nevada, Reno, and some members of our FRAP program came out and we did a couple-day tour of the state forest in October. And Sarah is currently applying for some grant funding to continue some replicate studies that Rob York started up in Blodgett. And the thought right now is we're going to do some of these treatments on Mountain Home, some other non-state land, and also at the Latour Demonstration State Forest as well.
Okay.
So if the funding happens, and we're looking forward to doing that research starting this summer. She has been in contact with Jeff Letty, the current State Forest Biometrician, about getting some of this year's data, and she actually would prefer to have it in raw form. So the lack of the report and number crunching is actually beneficial to her, not so much for me as a manager.
Well, I'm glad the forest is white at the moment.
Me too.
Hopefully it stays that way for a couple months. See what else. So what kind of collaboration goes on in the Southern Sierra region with other land property owners, private or tribal or federal, in terms of data sharing and is that something that's going to be an emphasis for the next cycle, or
maybe the
regional cooperate, I guess, so it's not an island.
I think the best way for me to answer that is I think there's a lot of potential. I've got a great working relationship with Brian Ruger, who is the consulting forester that works on the tribal lands. We have not really had an opportunity to do much together. I think there's potential there. The purifier did burn through some of the tribal old growth stands, where he thinks that they probably have experienced a lot of mortality. So that's going to give me an opportunity to go look at what some head firing has done in some of these trees that we've always kind of contemporarily thought were resistant. I think resistance is going to be, it's just going to be good to have a couple managers, a couple RPS go out there and look and see what these trees look like coming into the spring and early summer period. The Sequoia National Forest it's been one of those revolving door positions with the forest supervisor. They're looking at getting a new one here now. It'll be the fourth one in the almost 10 years that I've been the manager there. So every time we make baby steps and start making strides toward doing something together, the administration changes and unfortunately, the discussions that I'm having with the supervisor are kind of, it's a relatively small circle, so, a lot of his support staff is not necessarily in the know of what we're doing, so. Hopefully this next person will be here for a while. I wish I knew who it was, but I don't yet. That seems like the Sequoia is one of those stepping stones to bigger and better things almost immediately thereafter appointment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that can be problematic.
Private, I think we discussed when we were there on the tour, there is not a lot of private land holdings in the Southern Sierra, particularly in that old growth mixed conifer, Sequoia dominated landscape.
Okay. So Matt, so the committee update to the board would be, that this forest is going to, require an extension on its management plan. Is there any other actions than that the board would have to take for that to occur? And then I have another question about the accompanying CEQA documents for all these management plans, and if that's it. I think you might have touched on that earlier, but if that's a statutory thing, or is the actions in the plans rather than the projects that are implemented in the plan generate the need for the initial study for the whole, I guess is something I'm curious about.
Okay, so the first part of the question would be, or your first question would be, taking it to the full board tomorrow, asking for a period of, it sounds to be 2020.
3 years or something, yeah.
So I think that, so we would, okay, so historically, you go before the board agrees, I draft a memo on behalf of the board and distribute it to the department indicating that a 3-year period of time has been granted with a expectation of March, February, sometime in 2020, in which a draft plan will be prepared for the management committee. In terms of the CEQA piece, there's been the last couple updates, I should say. The initial studies were being prepared concurrently with the management plan, and it resulted in some level of confusion, or not so much confusion, but inefficiency, because if the management plan is revised, the initial study ultimately has to be revised. If the mitigation is revised or included, the trajectory of that initial study changes, right?
Yeah.
So we're looking at I have been recommending to the forest managers and the folks within the department that are aiding and preparing these plans to take a good look at preparing the draft plan first, have it reviewed, and as we narrow in on having a very close to final draft of that plan, it makes it a little more efficient in terms of preparation of the initial study, because you are relying upon a foundation that is nearly complete. So that's what I've been offering to the folks preparing these plans, and that's the way when I take time to review them and review the initial studies, it's easier to do that once we've had the discussions about what the contents of the plan is going to have in it. And then I can provide some insight on what way to start looking towards what tool within CEQA would you utilize to conduct the environmental analysis. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Or even if it requires, there's probably no exemption for a management plan of this nature, but might perhaps there is.
Yeah, you raise a good point in that the other conversations I've had with forest managers is the level of information contained within the plan. Do these management plans actually constitute a project?
Right.
And I think that that's something that this board, I am looking at sometime in the near future to better understand if these plans do indeed constitute a project in which CEQA would be required. I think that there is certainly value. Well, let me put it this way. When we went through and looked recently at the update to Jackson Demonstration State Forest, we were very clear, and the board was very clear in that action that it was an informative document, that it was that subsequent activities would be required to negotiate through secondary, or not even at that point secondary, but through other CEQA processes, for timber harvest activities, for installation of facilities, for updating of infrastructure, whatever it may be. And so I think that there's an opportunity where the board, like they have done with the fire plan in the past, could exempt if the management plans are informational in nature and not relied upon for the implementation of on-the-ground projects, that there is an opportunity for the board to exempt the preparation of these informative management plans the same way that the board has exempted the fire plan, because it has indeed been determined to be an informational guidance piece rather than a project analysis piece. So we're looking at that, and so, you know, what my thought was is that we were gonna make one rotation through the updates of each individual management plan, then the board could look at the content of those updates across each individual state forest, and then at that time, look at the authority granted to the board in terms of potentially exempting them, and make some findings on how to proceed.
That's great. Thanks for having already put a lot of thought into that, because I was pondering that this weekend a little bit. And how it relates to Mountain Home, you know, an extension, I guess, as long as the projects and the, you know, the management objectives and everything going on is within the scope of that previous initial study, you know, then we should be good to go. But if there's anything that's going to deviate, I just don't want to have to be liable or not liable, but operating outside that environmental analysis that went with the initial plan, and doesn't sound likely there's something going to trigger that.
Well, you know, the other piece too is when we were at Mountain Home in September, and I don't want to misstate this, but when we were standing, what's the name of it? There's a wet ford that we crossed, and there was an area.
We were at the Wishon Fork in between.
Yeah, that's right, the Wishon Fork.
Yeah.
So there was an area where there was a managed fire that had been implemented under prescriptions, right? And that became a, how many acre, Jim?
That was just shy of 500 acres of managed fire.
500 acres of managed fire, and so at that point, that managed fire was conducted essentially under the environmental analysis of this particular plan. So when I think about that, and that really doesn't fit into the scheme of which I'm contemplating, but once the board is able to certify the VTPEIR, and hopefully projects of that type would be able to forward into the VTPEIR, then we no longer have to worry about the plans themselves supporting the department in their increasing pace and scale of prescribed burn and veg management across not only state forest, but all lands. But the state forest is a significant portion of that, right? There's several thousand acres that. And so I think not only having updates of each individual forest management plan themselves is important, but also looking at how the VTP could support Jim and Angela and all the forest managers in achieving some of the goals as they pertain to veg management as well, without having to rely upon the management plan.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So there's a couple pieces out there, but I've been recommending that we keep these as an informative piece rather than an operational piece, kind of setting the stage for someday trying to lift the burden of negotiating the CEQA process, because it is a heavy lift. I mean, it takes a fair amount of time, not only for the department to prepare these, for the board to review them, for board staff to carry out the process necessary. And if there's no real environmental analysis being conducted, then the question kind of is, what is the value of working through that process? You know,
Yeah, I don't want to take away from the implementation resources if it's not, you know, effective, and if the projects are being analyzed adequately, you know, that are implementing the goals. Yeah, that's good I think, to look at that.
So tomorrow for your report out of this particular item, if you feel it's appropriate to grant Mr. Crowell an extension of time through 2020, I would suggest it would be early 2020, that you would just ask the board for action on that tomorrow, which would precipitate me, which would result in me preparing a memo that I would likely deliver to Chief Reichman or Helgi, indicating that the board has offered an extension of time on an update to Mountain Home.
Is that, Chief, do you want to add to that, or?
Well, thank you, Member Andre. Matthew Reichman, CAL FIRE. First off, I want to say I absolutely support him and appreciate all his work that he's done there at Mountain Home. And this, I thank you for your consideration on the extension for the plan. It's absolutely not a reflection on the work that Jim does and workload that he's accomplishing down there. I think we saw that firsthand on the tour.
Yeah.
There are a couple, I think, significant issues that we have within the state forest program in general that deal with our staffing. And you asked about that earlier. And I mentioned that it is special funded off of revenues generated from harvesting activities on the forest. Quite frankly, we're still recovering from some of the down tick in revenues that we saw as a result of the challenges at Jackson. We do have several state forest positions that are we have the position authority for, but aren't currently funded, or we don't have the funding to support hiring. For instance, Jim has a forester one on Mountain Home right now that's vacant that we haven't been able to fill. So we're working on that. We're looking at other opportunities and possibly even other funding sources to support the forest management and operations that we have on the state forest because of the value that the research and the demonstration brings not only to the department but the state. Another area that I think we should take a closer look at is the fact that, and I know it's in statute, that we're revising these management plans every 5 years. Most of our, I'd say all of our other programs in which we use management plans, take CFIP as an example, California Forest Improvement Program. Management plans are essentially effective until there's been some significant change in the environment or something that would warrant a revision to that plan. Certainly within the scope or within the timeframes of 5 years, that's a very small amount of time to be reconsidering the management of these properties. So I think at some point we need to start talking about looking at a wider window for us to be able to, I think, more effectively capture in the long term what we want to have accomplished on those properties. That said, and I think when Peter gets up and talks a little bit about Bog's management plan, we'll talk a little bit about the team that we stood up in order to support that development. I think there's an opportunity here to do something similar, but again, we need to consider the fact that we are augmenting the state forest program with our other staff in the department. And then lastly, I would say in regard to collaboration, you had a question about that, and I know down in Mountain Home in Jim's area, we've been working a little bit with BLM in order to possibly develop some good neighbor authority that will allow us to assist and better collaborate with BLM on operations and forest management activities on federal lands as well as on private lands. And we're working closely with the RCDs and the counties in order to pull in that SRA and that private land piece as well. So
excellent.
There are large-scale landscape collaboratives down there as well that we've been pretty actively working in and continue to support. So
great.
With that, I appreciate your consideration for the extension. Nothing else to report.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Chief. Yeah, 5 years is not much. You can take a year to write a plan or more, and then all of a sudden year 4 you're redoing or updating it. So yeah, I think that's worth looking into. Just, that's a pretty narrow time frame. So turn it over to any questions on the internet? Okay. Any other public or agency desires to address the committee on this one, on this item? Okay. YG, you've had quite a bit of experience with these plans and the CEQA process. Is there anything you could add to what you've heard before today? Or?
Yeah, it's funny because I've been desperately sitting here thinking about how I could tweak Jim just a little bit. Anything, but really can't.
Okay. All right.
Remembering the executive officer's admonition, George Central California Forestry Association. In terms of the CEQA process, it makes perfect sense to explore the categorical exemption process, which is, I think, what Matt's referring to. These management plan documents do not get used in any shape that I can see as tiering documents. It just depends on if they want to utilize any aspect of the management plan as a tiering document, if they're including the option A or any SYP information in it. But for the most part, that might be true of Jackson. It's a
Yeah.
little less true of the smaller forests, and it places a really heavy burden on the state forest staff. If you look at the original management plans that were done for bogs, they were very straightforward, simple documents, 60 pages or less, brief synopsis of current conditions and what future plans were. When you have these 5-year cycles, it just makes sense to really explore the CADX approach. It's something that I think would be worthwhile.
Thank you, YG. Okay, well, that convinced this committee.
Thank you for your time.
Thanks for coming down, Jim.
And anything pops up later, I'm always available by phone call.
Okay.
Consultation.
Yeah, thanks again for the board field trip.
You're welcome.
All right. Before we leave the item, any other? Okay. All right. Staff, you're ready? I can see you both barely, so.
You know, one thing that I would like to talk about, and I'm not going to be, I cannot say this with 100% surety right now, but the 5-year period of time in which the management plans were brought before the board, that was mentioned by Chief Reichman to be considered for lengthening potentially.
Mm-hmm.
I do not believe that actually resides within statute. I think that resides within board policies. There are statutory requirements, namely 4645, I think, that indicates that the department will manage these forests concurrent with a plan approved by the board. But I don't believe that the Public Resources Code actually indicates that there's a 5-year return interval in terms of updating. Whereas the policies of this board do state that. Now, so I will look into that over this next month.
Okay.
And as we look into issues such as categorical exemptions, as we look into such issues of updating board policies, which I've indicated is something that I think would be of interest and something we should look at very soon. That these are some of the kind of things that we'll be thinking about as we bring recommendations forward to the various committees on processes that affect the state forests specifically. So with that said, I would turn your attention to your binder where we now have a draft version of the Boggs Mountain Vegetation State Forest Management Plan. It is a draft version, as I indicated. It is the plan only, as I was mentioning earlier. It does not have the supporting CEQA documentation for the reasons that I talked about earlier. Moving forward, trying to hone in and develop a strong foundational document that the initial study can be developed off of. I do know that Mr. Lusinger had some help from Kristen Merrill, I believe is here. She ran a team of individuals to assist in preparing this, because you will hear from Mr. Lusinger that he too is under some duress when it comes to issues. So I want to thank Kristen very much for stepping up and essentially directing a group of individuals to assist Peter in getting this done. There's been several extensions on the Boggs management plan offered by the board in the past, and so we are presenting this today, or the department is presenting this today, that is in concurrence with the last extension that was granted by the board in terms of preparing a draft for consideration. So with that said, I would pass it over to the department and the Chief Reichman or Mr. Lusinger to move forward on a discussion of the draft.
I just want to echo what Mr. Diaz said about Kristen Merrill's effort here. Without her contribution to the document and coordination of what I like to refer to as the strike team of resource management professionals, somewhere in the area of 8 to 10 folks, both within and outside the department, who contribute to various sections based on their expertise. Without her efforts, this document wouldn't be here in front of us today. So I just want to thank her for that. As well as Peter and all the work that he's put into it as well. He's got obviously a unique situation in Boggs, and I'll let him speak for himself, but he's got some unique challenges there, and we've been trying to support him as best we can with everything from his contracting to trying to get the 3,000 seedlings into the ground this spring. And so, that's all I had. I just wanted to make that.
Okay. Thank you, Matt. All right, welcome, Peter.
Morning, Lou Andre. Thanks for having me here. I'm here to present the draft management plan for Boggs Mountain Demonstration State Forest. And thank you to Chief Reichman, as he indicated, put together a team of individuals organized by Kristen Merrill to help us prepare the plan. As you know, Boggs was heavily impacted in 2015 by fire, and the workload has been considerable trying to rehabilitate the property and navigate the state contracting process for all the work that we need to get done. So, thank you.
All right. So we have this draft. I went through it this weekend. It was great reading. I have a few questions, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, we've done our best to provide kind of a baseline condition of where the property is at in its current state, and notably there is information that I did not have to provide in the plan regarding inventory, as somewhere among 95% of all the trees on the property have died and replaced them with seedlings. And we've also had considerable upgrades to the road system in order to do a lot of the salvage logging. So a road management plan is something that really needs to be done for the property moving forward.
Yeah, at least the roads are in good shape, huh? But so it sounds like the regeneration survival was pretty good on the reforestation efforts too.
Yeah, what we planted last year, somewhere around 300,000 trees, I would estimate we're above 90% survival in those plantations. So obviously the wettest winter on record may have something to do with it, but also a lot of hard work and attention to detail as well. So we're hoping to have similar results this year when we do get started. I have 403,110 seedlings in cold storage right now, just waiting to be put in the ground the second I have a signed contract.
Are those contracts or the planting specs? Because I know there was some, non-standard or kind of different climate resilience planting specs, mixes and stuff. Are those posted on the web page for the forest? Or
not right now. We are working with one of our user groups, the Friends of Boggs Mountain, to put together some information on our planting plans for this year and try to get that out into the public. Obviously, one of our priorities is reopening the property to public use, and so we've been using that avenue to try to keep the public informed of what has been a lengthy process, to try to replant 3,000 plus acres.
Yeah, because you got quite a bit of recreation going on with all that activity. It must have been interesting.
Well, and the recreation at Boggs is a real driver of the local economy. Over the years, Boggs has hosted several large bike races that bring quite a bit of money into the top area. So,
do you guys have downloadable, a lot of places use downloadable PDFs that have locational for your smartphones? Avenza is one app.
Every day we use that, and it's a great tool, not only for the fire line, but even in forest management to be able to bring our planting contractor onto the property and put a geo-reference map in their hand that they can take everywhere with them. It's a great tool.
Speaking of reference, how were the old CFI plots referenced? Were they tagged on trees, and is it going to be hard to relocate plot centers?
Most of them are still there. They have a T-post in the ground marking the location. A lot of that CFI inventory was used to come up with volume estimates for salvage sales, and also just in preparation of trying to put together a baseline for how much of the property had been impacted by the fire.
Do you know if private timberland owners around bogs, the boundary, the interface with bogs, is that a special treatment area like it would be if it was a state park or a county park or a city park? Is that, or is that not considered a special treatment area for adjacent landowners?
I don't
In the
believe
rules.
that it has ever come up to my knowledge.
There's probably not a ton of active timber management on the private adjacent parcels, I guess. Maybe there is.
No, I mean, there has been post-fire quite a bit of salvage, and of course those private landowners that are our neighbors can really take advantage of the export market. So a lot of those smaller mom and pop properties are shipping logs down to the port. I've never had it come up in my time at the forest or working in forest practice in the Coast District, any kind of special treatment area next to the state forest, but it is a good question, and it may come up someday.
What other notes did I make? I know staff's been going through this, and in terms of, I see it probably pretty likely we'll bring this to the board next month, because we have this draft. In terms of measuring progress or stating the this is a pretty interesting case at this point. I know it's everything's changed. It's totally changed, and I think it's a great plan, and I'm glad that a lot of research is being attracted there still,
Yeah, we're doing our best to incorporate, the research studies into our management, not only in the written management plan, but in our day-to-day activities. A lot of these research projects require treatments that may differ from what we would normally do on a given acreage of the forest. So, we work really closely with the research teams to make sure that our overall broad management isn't going to negatively impact their experiments up there.
I should recall this from the previous plan, but that desired future condition or the mid-seral kind of demonstration of that type, was that carried over, or is that a new concept?
Well, it's been in the prior management plans for bogs, and I think you'll see in this plan that we carried that over as a future goal. I think it's a long way out from now. I believe we had a discussion in the plan of allowing these even age plantations to develop to 40 to 60 years old, and then applying transition type silviculture to try to get that all age stand as a long-term management goal. I think it's not something that will happen in the span of my career even.
Okay. Well, I want to make sure the rest of the full committee gets the benefit of this review and having your presentation. So I hope you can make it down to a future probably April, I'm thinking. Yeah, meeting.
Okay.
But we'll probably want to do that. But in order to get through as much as we can today, any commenters for this item on there? Okay. Public auditorium. George Gentry.
I spend a lot of time on bogs, or have in the past. Tried to stay out of the way the last couple of years. There's a lot of things going on. So I'm really looking forward to seeing all the experiments as they move forward on this. But the real reason I came up here was to tell you, in relation to our last conversation with Mountain Home, there is no provision in regulation or statute for the review time for any of these management plans. There's no set thing. The board set by policy in 2001 that the department shall present to the board a thorough review of each existing plan at least every 5 years. After each review, the board may direct the department either to continue management under the existing plan prepare amendments to the plan or prepare a new plan for public review and board approval. So in essence, what we asked through this policy was to continually review what was going on to see if things were still in scope.
Right.
That's how we were able to do any kind of work on JDSF that fell outside the court order. We just basically continued operating
Right.
under the old management plan. So the 5-year is a policy set by the board just so they can be updated as to what the current situation is.
It's a healthy process to have a thorough update and to get these reports and having the field trips. I think.
The board really appreciates having, just general updates. At least that was always my experience, even more frequently as to what kind of activities are going on. So I just wanted to make sure that we were clear on that before anything else. There's nothing in statute, there's nothing in regulation that mandated that. That was the board's decision to have regular updates.
Thank you, YG. Well, that's something for the full board discussion at some point, just so that we're well grounded in that way, because depending on the situation, just keeping the management under the existing plan with some or amending it, could be a lot simpler process in some cases. In this case, the whole forest changed quite a bit, so to me it warrants an updated plan to kind of reset things or restate things. So. I was looking at a PNW website just this weekend too, and all the research papers, how they're listed there. The Pacific Southwest, the Forest Service research laboratories. I know they're active on some state forests, probably this one as well as Jackson, in terms of a lot of research, cooperative research. Is there anything we're contemplating, for the state forest to kind of improve the access to information and studies or the dissemination of findings, to the public and other stakeholders?
Well, I would say one of the things that I've been trying to work on in the background is, developing the facilities to allow us to attract researchers to the property. Through a minor VOCP process, I'm trying to add additional barracks and a new office building at Boggs in the 2019-2020 budget. Time will tell if that's incorporated or not. But I think both of the properties that I manage, Boggs and Las Posadas, I think providing access for researchers to feel comfortable staying at the properties, similar to what JDSF offers, something that could really help us in that arena. Right now, with the two large ongoing studies that CAL FIRE is working on internally through FRAD and through the hydrology program, I haven't really spent a lot of time looking for other research opportunities for things to do at Boggs, as the reforestation angle has really taken up 90+% of mine and all of my staff's time. So we're hoping that after this planting season that I'm about to enter, we'll have somewhere to the tune of 3,000 of the approximately 3,500 acres of bogs planted, and then let some dust settle and kind of refocus that vision for, I think there's a lot of great opportunity at Boggs to do more research. So it just hasn't been something that I've been able to prioritize at the time.
Yeah, it's a great location, and it'll be interesting to watch its evolution.
Yeah, very high site, timberland,
yeah.
And very capable ground, and a blank slate at the current condition.
Yeah, as you can tell from the aerial photo. Yeah, we'll bring this one back, and so the full committee can hear it, and maybe by then we'll have a little more bigger picture framework for everybody on how all these management plans are updated and how it, just some things we've learned today or relearned today about the board's policies. So that's not necessarily an automatic complete update, but a rewrite, but a thorough update. But here, the change condition I think warrants almost a new management direction, new management plan.
Absolutely.
All righty. Board staff, any more comments on this one? I think, anybody else from the audience want to talk about the Boggs Mountain Demo Forest Management Plan process update that we're looking at?
I have no further comments. The only thing I will say is I'm going to take a look at it myself. I started this last week and read through it. I will continue to do that, dedicate to make sure that I have eyes on it throughout the whole document so that I can assist in minor grammatical errors or where they get caught, just to bring a more polished version forward next month. And I'll pass all those, anything that I catch, I'll pass them on to the team for consideration.
Peter, for the areas that didn't burn outside of the boundaries of the forest, what's the pest situation on the live timber in that region or in the vicinity?
Epidemic. The bark beetle population is out of control. We obviously lost a lot of live trees in the fire in that event. In the 2.5, almost 3 years since that time, we continually see pretty steady decline in the green stands that we have on the property, as well as adjacent timberlands as well. So even with the wettest winter on record last year, we really didn't see any decline in beetle population. So, you can probably attribute that to the large number of standing dead trees in the general assessment area for Cobb Mountain and Boggs Mountain. So not a lot of improvement in that area to report right now.
And most of the hardwoods are probably resprouting and had they're completely killed or top killed at least, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
The hardwood resource.
We're trying to manage them a little bit to allow our conifer seedlings to thrive in their infancy, but those, the live oak and the black oak are very vigorous, and they will probably continue to be a management problem moving forward even by treating them now. So.
Is there anything you learned from the bids on the reforestation that demonstrate, what costs are maybe for private landowners doing CFIP projects in terms of costs on reforestation and these kind of burns, whether, I don't know if it required shade collars and weed mats or things like that, but.
Well, I think the most important thing that I've learned, and granted I've learned a great deal over the last couple of years, in plantation development, is that it pays to do it right the first time. So, for private folks, I would say investing in the site preparation, vegetation treatment, and all of those little things that you do prior to putting those trees in the ground is what makes for great success. So I've seen adjacent properties where people have tried to replant after the fire, and every tree is dead because none of the competing vegetation has been treated in any way.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there's a valuable demonstration right there of just techniques in reforestation, successful ones that because the state provides a lot of cost share for private lands who are trying to do the same thing. So.
Yeah, buy once, cry once is the saying, and it's expensive, but there's nothing more expensive than doing it twice.
Is there any issues with, I'm not even going to bring it up, never mind. But reforestation contractors, I'll bring it up. there's a prevailing wage issue with under landscaping with state contracts. I know it's not an issue because of, you know what I mean?
Well, it hasn't impacted me personally, but I would say at every contract walkthrough that I've given over the last 2 years, and that is several, I'm always asked about the prevailing wage issue, and I defer those to our contracts analysts with the business services offices. We've never awarded it on any contract that I've undertaken at Boggs. And that's kind of the limit of my knowledge about it. Is that contractors want it.
Because, Matt, does that rattle into the urban forestry realm, you know, for projects and funds where, because I know a lot of cities and counties and states who contract out landscaping services have a prevailing wage issue on parks and things like that. I don't want to deviate too much, but since I got you both here.
I don't know off the top of my head.
Yeah, that's an interesting one with reforestation. Somebody asked me that question the other day, and I didn't have an answer. So. Anyway, all right. Thank you, Peter.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Okay. We'll revisit that one. On to item number 3, the Program Timber Environmental Impact Report, PTEIR, for carbon sequestration and fuel reduction program. This came from the legislative. It's from statute for us to develop a rule package for a grant program, and we have Thembi Boris to preview this. We have also, and I'm really glad we have Michael Jared, staff from the Assembly Natural Resources Committee, where most of the work in putting this early, the purpose and need for this, what happened. So, Michael, you're Michael. Michael, oh, sorry. Okay, great. So I'll let Thembi Boris kick this off, and then we look forward to seeing how we can best proceed. I know I read the. Chief Reisman, we've been working on this for a couple of years, and we parked it for a while, and now we're trying to move to complete it because it's unfinished business. But I'm concerned with some of the outreach input or from the outreach, the scoping, what we got from the RPF community and landowner community. So I want to make sure we are careful to make sure we have something that will be usable. Usable, and because it's going to take a bit of work to finish this off, and we want to make sure it will be utilized. So, with that, Thembi.
Chairman Andre, Thembi Boris, board staff, here to introduce the discussion regarding the ongoing effort to enable the PTEIR for carbon sequestration and fuel reduction grant. Before I introduce the material that the committee has before it today, I wanted to provide a bit of history. Senate Bill 862 was approved in June of 2014 and included many mechanisms to get at GHG emissions reductions, one of which was the PTEIR for carbon sequestration and fuel reduction grant, but did require board action to develop regulations, guidelines, or publications. This committee, board staff, and department staff worked on enabling this grant-funded permitting option in the second half of 2014 and the first half of 2015. At the end of which substantial progress had been made on the procedural guide and supporting documentation, but required more work. At the same time, board staff contracted, and the PTEIR for carbon sequestration and fuel reduction grant was set aside. At the beginning of 2018, given adequate board staffing levels, the management committee returned to the task. Additionally, in the interim, 2 pieces of legislation altered the task of enabling this grant-funded permitting option. Assembly Bill 109, the Budget Act of 2017, Section 15.14C, made the Administrative Procedures Act not apply to guidelines or other standards adopted and used by a state agency in administering an allocation of monies from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. Originally, in 2014 and 2015, regulations were the only enabling path that the board was considering because elements of the procedural guide met the definition of a regulation. The other piece of legislation that altered the task of enabling this grant-funded permitting option was SB 859, which was approved in September 2016. Specifically, Public Resources Code 4799.05 C2 specifies that for monies appropriated to the department for landscape scale projects, for multiple benefit projects such as tree thinning, carbon sequestration, forest resilience, and improved ecological outcome projects, the department shall give grant funding priority to landowners who practice uneven age forest management with a resilient forest of diverse age, size, and species class within the boundaries of the project, and whose activities are conducted pursuant to an approved timber harvest plan, non-industrial timber management plan, or working forest management plan. Additionally, an application for a grant for a project under this subparagraph shall include a description of how the proposed project will increase average stem diameter and provide other site-specific improvements to forest complexity, as demonstrated by the expansion of the variety of tree age classes and species persisting for a period of at least 50 years. Also, the department must give funding priority to landowners who agree to long-term forest management goals prescribed by the department. Fast forward to the last meeting with new faces, different experiences, and an opportunity to look at this grant funding permitting option from a distance. The question whether it would be used was posed, and subsequently the committee suggested staff invite comment. Management 3.1 represents the first invitation to comment, and Management 3.2 represents a clarified follow-up. Specifically, folks were asked to comment on the likelihood that eligible timber landowners, those owning less than 5,000 acres, will restrict their deed to uses compatible with the PTEIR in exchange for funds from the department to pay for the cost of preparing a PTEIR for carbon sequestration and fuel reduction. And the likelihood that eligible timber landowners will use the PTEIR grant for carbon sequestration and fuel reduction, given that subsequent to the approval of the PTEIR, a program timber harvest plan would have to be prepared at the cost to the landowner. And for those with experience with existing PTEIRs, the efficiency of use and success as a permitting option under the forest practice rules of the existing PTEIRs, of which there are 4 in the state. So pursuant to the legislative intention, the audience for this grant-funded permitting option are coalitions of landowners not currently engaged in management. The intent of the PTEIR for carbon sequestration and fuel reduction is to incentivize these landowners to engage in management, which would result in improved forest health, increased growth, and reduced fuel, which in turn would yield a carbon benefit. However, if not used, the effort spent in enabling it becomes an out-of-touch, inefficient exercise. Management 3.3 is a compilation of those responses, of which we received 11. The committee may consider that in light of other permitting options, such as exemptions, in particular the forest fire prevention pilot project exemption, being a counteractive force, and that PTHPs perhaps only affording a marginal time and cost savings relative to a regular THP, if this is the right mechanism at the right time. And I have relevant responses that I'd like to bring your attention to. So on page 1 of Management 3.3 from Jared Gerstein and RPF out of Humboldt, I like the concept of a statewide PTEIR for carbon sequestration and fuel reduction. What I recommend to our clients, again, private consulting RPF, on tight budgets is to use CFIP funding to cut small trees and then come back with a 1038 exemption to commercialize some of the larger trees under, for example, the forest fire prevention exemption. One of the bigger expenses of the PTHP or even THP process is NSO, botany, ARC, and then there's a 2-year delay for NSO protocol. Unfortunately, the PTHP will not help on those expenses. PTHPs are less expensive to prepare than THPs, but still may not be cheap or easy enough to make it possible to do non-commercial forestry. This is from a forester in the department, Robert Little, and he's worked extensively as an inspector in AEU, and the PTHP will still be more cumbersome when compared to the suite of exemptions and emergencies that are now available, from everything from fuel hazard reduction to removal of dead trees in any amount. Seems I can get a better deal elsewhere and have the same outcome with a less of an encumbrance term. From Larry Camp, who speaks to the PTHP process being inefficient. So I think the first choice of the committee is to whether or not to, and honestly, I'm not sure, like, given that the legislature did request that the board take action, if the board has the discretion to say, well, you know, with the outreach that we've done, it doesn't appear usable as it is. If the board has the discretion just to say, we're not going to enable it or take further action. But so I would think the board has two choices at this point to say it's just not going to work, or that it is, and to suggest recommendations to the legislature to make it work. And some of those that also came from responses, and I'll just summarize here, were remove the requirement for the deed restriction, allow fuel break restriction, change applicant to a single landowner or a community group, minimize the constraints, remove watershed specific, not limit other grants. For example, Mary Maeda, who's forester for Mendocino County Resource Conservation District, said that many of these small landowners have significant road costs to bring them up to a standard to make it meet the road rules, and to not limit them from getting grants that might allow road improvement.
Like we put in the WFMP.
Right,
Yeah.
and the NTMP.
Yeah.
Provide for funding to support a revolving loan fund for the development of the PTHP, so that, so let's say a community group does, the applicant receives the grant funding, then they have an ability to help landowners with the cost of the subsequent tiered document. And then perhaps coupled with a safe harbor agreement to get at some of the golden spotted owl issue in the areas where this would be applied. And I just want to say on a final note, and this came primarily from my conversation with RCDs, is that I'm convinced that to get small timber landowners to manage their land in aggregate for the public benefit, that they must be educated, they must have a cheerleading section, and there must be someone to coordinate and assist. Because again, many of these landowners, as we've discussed before, many of these landowners aren't in it for timber management. They're in it for recreation, or in it for aesthetics, or something entirely.
Or they would already be doing timber management if that's what their interest was. Yeah.
Exactly. And so to get these small landowners to manage their land in aggregate for public benefit, they have to have, as I say, a cheerleading section, someone to coordinate and assist, and they must be educated. So again, but we also have the confounding counteracting forces of existing permitting options that are facilitating fuel reduction, for example. I also want to thank everyone who provided the comment.
Yeah.
This 17 pages of comment did not come easy. You know, these were took a bit of follow-up, and it also took people taking hours of their time to write responses. So I don't want to, I just skimmed over these responses, but I want to give a lot of appreciation to the people who provided these responses. And that's all I have.
Okay. Well, thank you, Thembi, and thanks for reaching out to, practitioners and foresters and landowners to get these responses. It seems like the main concern, I mean, there are a lot, but was the deed restriction. And I was thinking about that quite a bit lately. And I mean, you can't spend over $100,000 of state funds for something that could be undone, without some guarantee there's going to be, some lasting benefit for carbon, fuel reduction, and other public benefits. And maybe there's other ways to do that. A deed restriction. I mean, there's Wildlife Conservation Board has their notice of unrecorded grant agreement. Resources Agency has their ADRC administrative administrative deed restrictions covenants, but that's a deed restriction, but there's different flavors of it. CFIP requires 10 years, that you do not, do things contrary to the on the ground practices. Same with CDFW on, watershed restoration, fish habitat projects. You have to sign a 10-year term. I mean, just so money's not wasted, you have to have something. So I don't have an answer to it, but I think that specific thing, and maybe Mr. Jared could help us with that too, would be huge to figure out a way to address that one in a way that still works, provide some guarantee that the state funds don't get wasted if somebody just cancels it or subdivides or does something contrary to the intent. But there may be easier or less onerous ways to accomplish that. Last thing that I think the board wants to do is to block, greenhouse gas fund grant funds from being implemented on good on the ground projects that provide a climate benefit. So, but we want to make sure that we do this in a way that it gets utilized. I helped. I think Eric remembers this too. The modified THP for fuel treatment, rule package a few years ago. I don't think there's been one implemented. So, it takes a lot of work and effort to develop a rule package. You want to make sure there's been one? Okay, then I feel better about it. It was totally worth it then. Okay. That's good to hear. Okay. But we want to make sure that there's a ready and willing group of landowners who will embrace it. And perhaps there was when it was started. So maybe you could come up now, Michael, and talk about the background that went into this, because we want to make sure that we're delivering something that has stakeholders who are ready for it. RCDs, open space districts, water districts. I can see a lot of those types of entities probably pursuing this. But anyway, can you enlighten us a little bit on what went into the purpose and need in this, so that it helped us, I think, in kind of shaping our direction?
Well, unfortunately, this statutory mandate came about in a budget bill, and it's somewhat unclear to me where its origin was from. And in addition, I'm talking with Matt, and we're trying to figure out, is there any funding dedicated to these grants that are going to assist people to get the PTEIR. And if there's no funding for the grants, it doesn't make a lot of sense to carry through with the regulations. And as far as the deed restriction, I like your other ideas. I think the main thing we're interested in, and have the same sort of discussion with the department's greenhouse gas reduction forest health program, that if we're going to pay for fuel reduction and work on the landscape, we want to make sure that those benefits endure. Because if we use greenhouse gas reduction fund money and then later that those trees that are supposed to offset their original work are cut down, then we no longer have a benefit.
Right.
As far as fixing the statutory requirement, simple things like adding a community group or specifying that there's other mechanisms for securing the benefits of the deed restriction could in theory be done in a committee bill. But once we start doing major changes that affect funding, it would probably make more sense to have it be in a budget bill, especially since that's where the original requirement came from. I think I'm happy to engage with the Assembly and Senate budget committees on this topic. And as the board is staffed up and is able to have more capacity to deal with things like this, we just want to make sure that there's a benefit once the
Right.
the goal and the outcome that we want to see. And I think there could be a benefit. And there's been a lot of interest in the legislature about doing more work on the watershed level, but we don't need to be tied to one specific way to do that. I know that there's a pilot project funded by the timber tax.
Mm-hmm.
It was just trying to compile the data in specific watersheds. And then I think the eventual hope is that we can get more permitting done on our watershed so that all the different projects within that watershed are consistent to an overall objective of improving the health of the watershed. And also, everything we try to do in forestry is to improve the sequestration potential.
Yeah, well, we're totally aligned, I guess, on that.
Yeah, and I'm sorry that I don't have more history. When a bill's done through the regular process, there's opportunity for stakeholders to weigh in, and there's a sponsor and an author. But when it just appears in the budget,
In the budget bill, yeah.
There's less sort of forensic accounting. But I'm happy to answer any other questions and make myself available.
Okay, I appreciate that. I was glad to hear you're going to be here today. I'm sure we'll have some follow-up for you. But in the terms of budget or money that's available, there is, I guess, for a period of time, potentially money is available, right? Till what, 2022 is
Yeah.
that would fund this kind of a grant program?
Yeah, we have Matthew with CAL FIRE.
Yeah.
We have cap and trade funds available now for grants. We've been going through that grant process. We just went through our proposals. The first year of the program, when we had the PTIRs on the table and we were working on rules, we had allocated about 1.2 million of our funds that first year specifically to the PTIRs. As we realized it was going through the rule development process, and we weren't probably going to make it within the timeframes that we needed to get those funds encumbered and funded, we went on ahead and reallocated those funds into some of our programs to utilize them. But we absolutely could use the PTEIRs as a granting option within the context of our forest health program. It just kind of depends on what that grant process, what that looks like, what the PTRs ultimately will be providing and how they fit in. But yeah, I think it's well within the scope of our forest health program.
Okay, thank you, Matt.
Is the goal to be able to do projects for like a much longer term period that are all tiered off PTEIR so that it's sort of less work for each individual project in the future?
Exactly that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I mean,
So you have the master document, that would be very, time consuming and expensive to put together, and only worth it if it lasts for a long period of time and facilitates projects tearing off of it over time. So.
I'm just wondering, CAL FIRE is funding larger landscape projects. Maybe talking to some of those applicants and seeing if they want that as a possible permitting pathway.
And we can do that, and then we reached out a little bit in that regard, and we have, I think, 4 or 5 existing PTERs out there, kind of watershed-wide type of planning document, and that was part of the interest of doing a little bit of an inventory or survey as to why those existing documents may or may not be used all that readily. So, I think, and I can do some digging into maybe if we had someone develop this language, it may have been one of our attorneys that worked on it a little bit. It could have been some former staff that are no longer with us. But I think the intent was to have a larger planning opportunity for commercial operations to be within the scope of our portfolio that we were using the cap and trade dollars for.
Yeah, and then, if the goal is to permit on a watershed basis, maybe talk about identifying a watershed and maybe starting with the area and the people who want to be involved and see how it can be made to work for them. And, like I said, I'm happy to engage in this conversation and either do a change in the committee bill or a budget.
Yeah.
I was thinking about it too, and I was thinking that, given the fact that the deed restriction is one of the significant problems that have been identified, that it's possible that something along the lines of WFMP be the programmatic document, the target project, right? This does by, now albeit it would likely have fewer landowners in it than something like a watershed level PTIR. But given the fact that it could expand up to 15,000 acres, and those planning watersheds in the state of California are generally under 8, you could still try to do something along the lines of finding a watershed or watersheds that have larger landowners within it that be interested in trying to increase programmatic coverage. Or maybe share the idea that it has to be watershed boundary specific and it's more landscape level planning, even though it may break outside the individual watershed and still be covering a larger landscape, 15,000 acres or less.
Yeah, I think, like I said, we're open to, we had a deeper discussion on the health program, the GPRF, and they found another mechanism, to just make sure that the benefits endure. So we can be flexible on that. Other ideas.
Yeah, there's I think there's some other ideas that might work. I think when people just got sent that, just saw deed restriction, that's probably all.
Some pushback on limiting it to 10 years because trees have an extremely long lifespan, as everyone here knows. So we would hate to provide a bunch of grant money to make a forest look really nice, and then on year 11 have sort of different management objectives with farming.
So Matt, were you saying a WFMP could just be a surrogate for developing one to accomplish some of these same goals?
That's what I was thinking. I mean, the reason I say that is because when you look at the goals associated with the particular PTIR that guidelines may be developed, is that they're looking at carbon sequestration as one of the goals associated with PTIR, which requires higher levels of growth and yield standards. And if you look at the regulations for the WFMP, although those regulations are currently being challenged, the goals associated with the promulgation of those regulations and the chapters of those statutes are very similar to the goals associated with PTIR.
Yeah.
And so you could almost replace PTIR with WFMP and still achieve many of the same goals, and it may not have some of the restrictions wouldn't have some of the restrictions associated with that type of planning document where this PTIR.
Yeah. Because you still can't monetize CFIP or VTP material, correct? I mean, that's.
Right, we have to be really careful about crossing over between and then funding what is ultimately a requirement of the active rules.
Yeah.
So traditionally, that's not something that we provided the funds for. That's why in the context of a planning document, it's fine, but that PTHP that then, when you start thinking about tearing off, is where it gets more challenging. And I don't know how the WFMP, that's still a planning document.
There's still a planning document, but then the notices that would be prepared would be the tiering mechanism, if you will, and the notices would be the more challenging part of the planning fund. Just like the THP would be the more challenging part of the fund, eventually.
Yeah. Cedric, did you have your hands up?
Yeah, I just wanted to throw out that.
All right, we go to.
Recreational comment. Yeah. So.
Thank you.
Cedric White, Sierra Pacific Industries. I was just listening a little bit about that and think about some of those larger goals that we're trying to achieve, and wondering if when you think about creating that funding mechanism for the landowners, scope gets so narrow all of a sudden, you want it to have good pro quo for that individual. We lose sight of the big benefit where you implement forestry, sustainable forestry or large areas, and then the state starts to get benefits, not just the sequestration, which is going to come because the land use, underlying land use of the property prevents, X, Y, and Z sorts of negative outcomes for the environment. But if you start to get secondary benefits like the water resource, people start thinking about that. I think the state's interested in making investments to secure water, wildlife habitat, reducing suppression costs. But I think what you need to do is be successful at implementing it widely and not trip over these small encumbrances. I mean, I think you've seen a bigger net benefit if you could get neighborhoods involved in this and not necessarily try to constrain them with a deed restriction when there's a general plan and zoning constraint for the property.
Thank you, Cedric. So the way the program's written now, I mean, we could maybe change that though. It would fund developing the PTEIR, but not necessarily the first PTHP, but that's something that could be wrapped into it, right? I mean, that's...
Yeah, right now, the legislation is not written that way. It's only written to fund the initial mother document.
Oh, okay.
And then the PTHP, the only thing, the feedback that I'm getting from community groups is that, a lot of them don't have base funding. And so, and a lot of these landowners are to incentivize them participating and also if they're cash strapped, to have a revolving loan fund.
Right.
So that here's your $50,000 to get your PTHP up and ready to go. And then once you commercially harvest, you pay back into that loan fund so that the next person can go, something like that.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But it presents things that we haven't experienced before as, for both the community groups and perhaps the funder. But a lot of these community groups also don't, because they don't have base funding, reimbursable payments are a problem for them. Where they do the work and they're reimbursed for it. They actually need the money up front.
Right.
So
they can't.
You would get a broader level of participation. And the watershed, just while I'm up here, the watershed, the reason that watershed was suggested to be removed, just because some of, let's say, the RCDs or fire safe councils, aren't specific to a watershed, and so it's more the communities that they serve. The areas that they serve may only be as large as a watershed, but it may span several watersheds, just depending on the community that they serve. Because again, for getting small landowners to participate in aggregate, where their main aim is not to do timberland management, you need that group working on their behalf, or that, at least that's what I see.
Yeah.
Is you need to have a cheerleading section, someone to assist, and so that's all.
Well, we put this as a priority 1 project for management committee because, we had invested quite a bit of time a couple of years ago to get it to a certain point. I'm not sure what's the best way to proceed in terms of...
Can I offer one thought on process? Tim did a really good job today. She offered all the challenges and thoughts on solutions, and offered the idea that there was kind of this binary approach, like either before making a decision that it doesn't work, before making a decision that it does work. And I would like to offer the thought that there might be a hybrid in that, where, and I would ask Mr. Jarrett actually if this would be helpful, but the board tomorrow, you could present to the board tomorrow, and Thimby could also follow up in your management committee update on a brief list of the challenges, brief list of the possible solutions. And given the fact that the board took the stance last meeting with the understanding that there are a myriad of legislative efforts out there, and essentially asked staff to participate where necessary to help this board be effective in their mission, There could be a letter written directly to Michael or to the Assembly National Resources Committee itself to help him in his efforts in determining how to move forward potentially. Not saying that it won't work, not saying that it does work, but that there are significant challenges, and you could go as far as to be very factual about what the PTEIR has represented in the past, the number of them, the utilization of them. Not saying that that's good or bad, but that is just the fact of the matter, that there's this many, they've been used this many times. This is the mandate that we've been offered. These are the ways that we've looked at it. These are the challenges that we're facing. These are the recommendations that we're making to potentially make it even usable at all or something along those lines. So rather than just saying it doesn't work or it does work, it's more along the lines of we've experienced these issues, we've looked at it, these are what we're recommending. Would that be helpful?
Yeah.
I think, if we get come to these are the suggestions.
Michael, because we're.
I think if we were able to come up with a list of suggested revisions to the statute, we could then review those with stakeholders and sort of say we could either make these changes, modify these changes to address stakeholder concerns, or just repeal the statutory requirement. And those are our three options. But it would be helpful to hear from the board what they would view as the changes that would make the document more useful and able to achieve its outcomes that we want to see from it.
Yeah. And that's the hybrid approach. So if some changes are made to statute, whether it's a budget bill or some other way, that would enable us to have a lot better odds of,
and
implementation of these things.
And the more significant the changes are, the more likely they would not be able to go in a committee bill or need to.
Yeah, right. So
most likely be in the budget trailer bill.
There's
we would need to engage with the budget committees.
Uh-huh. In terms of the calendar year, what's the timing on something like that?
The budget needs to be adopted by June 15th. Occasionally trailer bills move after that.
Okay.
So we're introducing a committee bill soon, and that can be added in any time up through June as well. But that would need to be, less controversial changes and changes of direct funding. So, like if, for example, you wanted to just add the ability for a community group to apply, or allow for another option other than a deed restriction, clarify that there's other ways to secure the benefits, that could be in a committee bill. But if you're affecting like a revolving loan fund or building the requirement that it be watershed specific, that seems a lot more substantial and it will require a lot more discussion and a difficult vehicle.
Okay. So you're available to work with board staff maybe in the next month or so?
I'm happy to
okay.
work with board staff.
Because I know we're not going to do this on the fly today, but I think it's been good to vet a whole bunch of ideas and possibilities and to be informed by the comments we got. I talked to a couple of foresters about this too, because I see utility in it, but I think it can work.
And I'm going to later today probably talk to the budget committee staff just to let them know there's some issues with this part of the budget.
Yeah.
And then maybe provide them the comments that you guys talked about.
Because we're trying to entice either reluctant or forest landowners who haven't engaged in management to date for some reason. So it's going to take, I think, a bit to, because you want them to be committed too and embrace it, not on the edge.
I think working with community groups like RCDs is a good idea. They can help facilitate that.
Okay, well, thanks.
Thank you.
members in the auditorium or folks in the auditorium, anybody else want to comment on this one that have some great ideas on how we can perhaps move this forward? We want to be careful it doesn't dominate our calendar year for the committee. Yet we've invested quite a bit of time thus far, and it seems like there's potential here, and we're not quite ready to say to just can this whole bill, I guess, because it's not going to go anywhere. Not the bill. What was the language? Or to suspend it. I forget what Michael said there.
So I think I understood Michael in saying that the three options were, one, to attach changes to a committee bill, attach changes to a budget bill, or repeal it.
Or repeal, yeah.
And so what I could do this evening in preparation for the standing committee report tomorrow is I could work on kind of along the lines of what Matt was saying, a letter, memo, but just something that the board would provide through the management committee to the legislature, to the Committee on Natural Resources, saying just that, this, giving some background, very much what we already have before us.
Yeah.
And then the obstacles, and maybe tomorrow at the board meeting, maybe in the standing committee, the board could consider what route they want to take in terms of like the heavier lifting, which would be to a budget bill, or the lighter lifting, if that would go far enough. Like that idea of just changing, just including a community group, or just changing other ways to secure benefits. Because I do see that, even if you do include community groups, even if you do address other ways to secure the benefits other than a deed restriction, you are still going to have significant obstacles to folks using this. And some of it has to do with the PTHP process in itself. It's somewhat more streamlined than a regular THP process, but is the marginal benefit more than the other pathways to folks doing fuel reduction or whatever.
Right.
So I think you'd have to go further. Although I think it's a way to start engaging these landowners who aren't participating in a coordinated fashion.
Well, it'd be a shame to put the effort into, amending the bill, whether it's a committee bill or the more robust route, and then end up at the end of it all saying, just repeal it. That wasn't good enough, or that wasn't enough, because you know what I mean? Because there's time and effort and everything else that goes into that. But if I'm not at the point of saying just repeal this, because it's not going to go anywhere. But,
okay.
Without the other committee members.
Right. I know. And my personal take is, just as a member of staff working on this particular subject, would be probably the changes that could be made in the committee of Committee of Natural Resources probably won't go far enough for this to overcome enough obstacles that it would probably have to go the heavier lifting, the changes in the budget bill.
Yeah, probably.
Because I think, and also I don't know where the WFMP idea fits into this.
Yeah, if it was going to fund a WFMP and it was carbon funding, greenhouse gas carbon, I think we would want to have some extra things in there on that assurance,
Okay, but one thing that the WFMP does get at that would address a lot of the commenters' concerns is the cost of the PTHP, because that's a discretionary review and the notice is not.
Yeah, right.
And so you're going to have a much less cost burden when you go to work under another document. So that's something to consider as, I mean, that would be a way of addressing that. So,
Yeah,
and
yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's something there, but I don't know if it'd just be the WFMP without something else. I mean, it would still have to have some sort of a,
quantify it like a
yeah, some metrics that the air board would buy out on probably, and some
probably the allowance.
things on yeah, and probably that, or and the deed aspects too, or the whatever we're going to call it, because but that seems like some of the commenters were saying that, alluding to that, or an NTM. Why not just do an NTMP? You know. And it could be an NTMP, right? Or a WFMP. Or a PTEIR, your choice, as long as you accomplish these goals. It's a long-term plan.
Yeah. The one thing that it becomes, and I don't want to get into the weeds too much now, but one thing that I see as a bit complicated, because so, like for the Mattole or Weaverville, right, those were big, right? And, I mean, Mattole covered like 198,000 acres, right?
Mhm.
Did they list every timberland owner there? Or did they do a mother document for the area? I haven't, I should.
Yeah, I think it's available to all the timberland.
It is available, but do you, and maybe Forest Practice can answer this, does the timberland owner show up in the PTEIR, or does the timberland owner show up in the PTHP, or does it show up in the PTEIR? Do all the timberland owners have to be listed in a PTEIR? In a PTEIR, so all the landowners in the total are listed. Or Weaverville.
Actually, maybe not.
Yeah, and see, that's where I
I
think it gets a little different between a PTEIR and a WFMP, is that with a WFMP, you have to have all the timberland owners
Yeah,
listed
right,
or going to
right.
be participating. One thing, you have more buy-in, you're gonna know everyone who's gonna be using that document potentially. Where a PTIR is kind of, again, more like an area coverage or for a community that a
Right.
community group serves, you know, and then people can participate in.
Right, and you're not going to restrict everybody's deeds who's in that, within that
Area coverage.
polygon, no.
Right, you're only gonna restrict their deed when they sign up, and that's not the way this is written, that would be something
Yeah,
that would
right.
have to change. But where then you encumber, or not encumber, but, secure the benefits at the PTHP level, you know, so, but.
Yeah.
So what are you thinking, Chairman Munger? Do you think we should, I mean, what are you thinking? And I'm curious as to know if anyone.
Yeah, I don't think anybody else want to comment before I say what I'm thinking.
Yeah, because it does feel like we've been kind of, like from my perspective as staff, I want to bring something to fruition.
Right.
Or I want to
End it.
move on to something that can be used. So I want to.
Yeah, sounds like it was a good idea. It came through in a budget bill, but maybe it hadn't been properly vetted out and scoped to see if the demand was there or if it was even practical, financially, and everything else. How can it be modified so that we can get more active management on the landscape, on lands that aren't being managed, that achieve the goals that are stated. And a PTHP, I think, or PTEIR is the barrier has always been the upfront costs. Same with the NTMP and the WFMP, but I think all three should be fundable with this program. That's a big amendment with some other elements in it, that tier it or, set it up for greenhouse gas emphasis and fuel reduction, and on lands that previously haven't been managed for some reason, right? Some of those are going to be marginal because the best timberlands in the state probably haven't just been not managed for, because nobody understands their worth, so it's probably going to be, different, higher fuel, lower stocking, all that kind of stuff. So it's going to be hard to carry the freight with forest products alone, But,
And the key might be in 4799.05, which is that section that came about in 2016, which was approved in 2016, that essentially says this is what, at the forest management level, this is what the department can fund with greenhouse gas reduction funds. And it lists THP, it lists NTFP, and it lists WFMP. Maybe.
what? Give me that number again.
4799.05. That came about in September of 2016. It essentially allows for the funding of, it allows for the funding of NTFPs, WFMPs, THPs that secure those benefits, or that,
That might be a,
I don't know how we dovetail these two things, or if.
I think we want to maybe bring that back. Have this on the agenda one more time for this committee when the full committee's here, and make some sort of game plan decision at that point. And I think we have a lot to go on now, and we should I can let the full board know about those 1, 2, 3 options.
But if we do that, we lose time.
I know.
It is much less likely then that we're going to get something
By June, yeah.
And then that gets to where it's less likely that the department's going to be able to fund, that's going to be able to fold this funding back, not to have any pressure,
Yeah, right.
Pressure. But it's going to be less likely for the department to be able to fund or to fold this kind of a roadmap into their existing programs of dissemination of the money received, that one-time money received from the greenhouse gas reduction. I mean, I think,
But what you just touched on there
Yeah.
was it basically expanding the regulatory.
Yeah, it says specifically PRC 4799.05 C2 specifies that for monies appropriated to the department for landscape scale projects for multiple benefit projects such as tree thinning, carbon sequestration, forest resilience, and improved ecological outcome projects, the department shall give grant funding priority to landowners who practice uneven age management with resilient forests of diverse age, size, and species class within the boundaries of the project, and whose activities are conducted pursuant to an approved timber harvest plan, non-industrial timber management plan, or working forest management plan. So they've named the mechanisms.
But they didn't name.
They didn't name
funding the.
Yeah, and it doesn't. And notice this language doesn't exclude the PTIR, carbon sequestration and fuel reduction. It doesn't exclude it. It doesn't say, well, the department can also fund that, or create guidelines for that. But what this does is it says it's okay to fund, landowners who have this intent to secure, the public trust benefits of carbon sequestration, for example, with these mechanisms, which are much more tangible than the PTIR, unfortunately. It seems to me like the PTIR and the PTHP process, and I don't mean to say this, but I feel like because there's only one that's being really well used. And there is a reason why the other three aren't. We can go back to the reasons, but I'm just afraid that if we use the PTIR as the only planning mechanism, we might be destining this to fail, not because of the landowners who are interested, or the community groups who are interested, or the funding source that's solid, but because of the mechanism being clunky, because it's not well used. And so we're gonna be trying to figure out how to use it, to some extent. Or people are gonna be trying to figure out how to use it.
Well, somebody's preparing a PTEIR right now, right? At least one entity. I mean, aren't they being prepared? Yeah, there's some in process. Yeah. So just the three that we hear about all the time, may not be the end of the story, as long as you have a 2-year OWL survey, you're never going to get an easy pathway, no matter what you do. I think, Well, I like what you're reading from, and maybe I don't know if there's a chance. Okay, here's the thing. I don't want to spend too much more time on this, but I want to get to some endpoint. We talked before about regulation versus just grant guidelines, right? So, and where do we land on that? Just setting up guidelines for the grant.
We landed on that, given the Assembly Bill 109, the Budget Act of 2017, essentially allowing programs, standards adopted and used by the state agency administering an allocation of greenhouse gas reduction funding, that the Administrative Act does not apply to those guidelines. So that then affords the board to not pursue regulations, where previously we didn't feel like we had that option, given that the elements of the procedural guide met the definition of regulation. But
so we can enable this statute with just guidelines.
Yes.
But we can't flex on the PTEIR requirements that are in rule, but we can work on other aspects of it to make it more enticing, or
Yeah, that would be where, I would think, that would be one of the changes. And again, I'm on board to this evening, coming up with, along the lines of what Matt was saying, having something for you to, bring to the board tomorrow. And then maybe, but putting in there, maybe the other planning method, maybe not just PTIR, maybe a working force management plan, NTMP, or THP. Does it matter? If the goal of the project is the same?
Probably not. What matters is what happens on the ground, and what happens and how long lasting the investment is for carbon is what matters, and expanding into areas that maybe have there's been barriers, and financially barriers probably the main one where.
Obviously, maybe a THP is not the appropriate vehicle with the lifespan set.
Yeah, right. I would.
Has that lifespan piece of it that would, at least if you're going to forward into that, you have to, for the life of the construct of that NTMP, WFMP, you have to meet that framework, right? If you're going to use it. So that kind of gives you the legitimacy of time.
Yeah.
Although, notwithstanding what you're talking about here, but maybe the THP doesn't quite meet that.
Yeah, I agree. That's just a singular project,
Okay. And then that, it could also be couched in a way that 479905, right? That's not attached to funding, that's not a budget bill, right? That's PRC, that's just saying this is how money once received will be spent, right, on forest management. But this is actually a budget kind of bill, right? And Mr. Garrett was saying, that, he could potentially look into changes being made in the budget committee. So perhaps 4799.05, the ideas in that, this could be a meeting of those two things. So you pull working forest management plan out of it, you pull NTMP out of it, you pull the things that say you're gonna, have a 50-year contemplation, perhaps,
Well,
all the elements of 479905, put them in a budget bill to
and that would,
make this a reality.
I'd be fine with you, Matt, working with the committee, and bringing something for us next month. I don't want to, I didn't mean to stall, wait till next month and just start the conversation where we left off, but without giving some direction, to flesh out what our options are. But is that what you're getting at? Is tomorrow bring on a summary of possibilities?
I think it's reasonable.
You're balancing the issue of time versus outcomes, and it's really up to you. It's up to it's up to you as a freestanding single committee member today.
I think I could put something together tonight and have something for you tomorrow for the board to make a decision on as to how then staff would move forward with the committee.
To spend some time.
Yeah, and then this way we can see if what we, and I really think it's probably gonna land somewhere in the budget. There's gonna be a significant changes.
Yeah.
And then if the budget committee says no, then they say no, and they then look at repeal.
And that might be most appropriate.
But this is a way to enable that 4799.05.
But I like the expansion into the other long-term plans, the NTMP and the WFMP, with some additional elements in it, like where, which would either happen just in the grant guidelines that would have to last for a long, that period of time. So for carbon, you know what I mean? All right.
Okay. Well, I'll work on it.
This is a hard one for just one committee member. Okay.
Yeah. It is a challenge, but it's a worthwhile challenge. There's a lot of landowners who are currently not engaging in management that we're wanting to, for the public trust benefit, have engaged in management.
Yeah.
And how do we do that?
No, it's a great goal, and I don't want to give up on it. And I can help between now and the next meeting too, however possible with you. Okay. Hope we left that with some direction, and we'll hear about it tomorrow. So, item 4, update on the process for the joint policy on hardwoods. I'm going to turn that over to our executive officer, Matt Diaz.
So this will be a very quick update. You'll recall last month that we brought forward the policy as well as some comments that have been offered by Department of Fish and Wildlife staff on the policy in terms of areas where they see that updating may or may not be necessary, things that could be addressed or revised. Dr. Gillis, Mr. Gillis last time was relatively strong in direction, offering what I thought to be a very good solution actually, or a good trajectory for us, was to reach out to Dr. Stanford and James Bartolome, who had spent a significant amount of their careers working on hardwood issues. They had spent a significant amount of time working on integrated hardwood management reports that were prepared in the past. and to ask them to come before the full board and to provide a presentation on some of the more contemporary science, some of the more contemporary thoughts on issues that the board should consider as we're moving forward on addressing, or moving forward on revising that joint policy, which pertains to hardwood management. So in the last month, Eliana and myself have been working with Dr. Stanford. We do have them lined up right now for, well, I should say Dr. Stanford and Dr. Bartolome. It sounds as though Mr. Bartolome is actually going to be teaching some courses the day of the next board meeting, or the April board meeting. So if you want to go and participate in person, Dr. Stanford, on the other hand, will be able to. So we're going to work with him in terms of getting him prepped up for a presentation next month in the April board meeting, and then likely at the May meeting, start having this issue reappear on the management committee agenda for moving forward on trying to craft some new and contemporary text that maybe will be able to be ported into this joint policy and hopefully presented to the commission. So that's my very, very brief update. You will not see this on the agenda next month because we will happen to be having this full board presentation, therefore no real items needed to be discussed.
For the committee,
here.
okay. All right.
And that moves us on to our last item of the day.
Yep. Steph.
And that is our
Conversion, and we have Eric Hedge to kind of.
And Eric is going to carry the water for that.
Okay.
He's going over the water, so be easy on him today. That's going to take over you well.
Oh.
Stand back and be easy on the guy.
Sorry to hear that. Good morning, Eric.
Good morning, Chairman Andre, Eric Hedge, board staff. If you look at tab 5 under the Management Committee tab and finder, it finds a draft lead and accompanying memo of staff recommendations for 14 CCR section 1104.1 conversion exemptions. These recommendations include both substantive and non-substantive changes, a description of which can be found on the memo accompanying the plea. The recommendations were developed by the board staff, the department, and industry representative, working from the committee's guidance provided at the January 2018 meeting. Two most significant changes since January include updated language allowing the department to refuse less than 3 conversion exemptions where prior illegal conversions taken place, which can be found on page 1, lines 21 through 24. The new language will allow discretion by the director based on conversion exemptions meeting the intent of the act. And new language has also been added, which requires timber operators to notify the department prior to operations, which can be found on page 6, lines 18 through 21. Additionally, through recent and ongoing communications regarding the board's recently adopted post-fire recovery emergency regulations, the Office of Administrative Law has identified a perceived shortcoming in the existing regulation, which impacts this rulemaking effort. Within the amendments to 1104.1A2K proposed here, the notification of prior operations, the board requires the notification to designated personnel at the appropriate department unit headquarters, but they do not provide any contact or other information to identify who that designated personnel might be to the regulated public. OAL believes that this should be modified for clarity, and they've stated that it's not necessary for the board to include explicit contact information within the regulation, but that the regulation should identify a way for the public to obtain that information. OAL has suggested including a provision at the end of the notification requirement along the lines of the department shall provide contact information for designated personnel at the appropriate department unit headquarters. This issue will also be addressed. This recommendation was part of the CAL FIRE recommendations for 2018 priorities, and it's included in the FPC issue of exemption amendments, so they will be discussed again later today. And unless there are any questions, that concludes my introduction to the topic.
Okay. Well, thank you, Eric. So quite a few of these, I think, came from the department. Is there anybody, Bill or anybody, Eric, that want to add to what Eric's outlined? I think we went over most of these in January. Yeah. So
What's that?
we went over quite a few of these.
Yeah, and it's mostly the same. Like I said, it's the big changes to them
are the change of the language in the refusing to allow or accept the conversion exemption, and then in the notification. Some of those language was modified. Other than that, it's
Yeah.
essentially the same as the January.
Right.
With some non-substantive
Just, yeah, it looks, I compared, it looks like it. On that one, just to be clear, where you cannot have a accepted conversion exemption, we might need to cap them in that line 22 also to fit what maybe is on line 8, the changes to line 8 where we
Yes.
capitalize
Yes.
conversion. Wait a minute, that's conversion permit. Okay, sorry. Maybe the conversion exemption
Yeah.
doesn't need the caps. I can't recall. Yeah, never mind. That's referring to conversion permit. So if it had been converted previously by the same owner, or even if it was a different owner, I guess.
Well, it only applies to the
Current.
So if it had been
Yeah.
by the same owner.
The current.
Yeah.
Okay. Just if all or portion of the continuous land has been subject prior to unpermitted timber conversion. So if that was a previous owner that did the unpermitted conversion, is that clear to you guys?
I believe that it wouldn't meet, or it would be, it's dependent on the person or the entity doing it, and so, or the entity converting, so that it had been converted prior, it wouldn't be subject to the same.
Do you know
Chairman Andre.
what I'm getting at? Yeah. Okay.
Chairman Andre, Eric Huff, Cal Fire Force Practice. Yeah, the intent here is to address the issue where we've had an illegal conversion by a particular landowner who then is coming to us.
Right. To correct it.
Affected
Yeah.
illegal conversion.
Yeah. Okay.
Either to correct it or to accommodate to just add to the illegal conversion.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's all clear to me, and it's all consistent now with our previous efforts. So, good job, Eric. Any questions? Yes, YG and Gary Rynearson. And anybody dialed in? Nope. Okay.
First Century California Forestry Association. I'm in agreement with most of these changes, and I'm in agreement with the intent of the first one to allow the director discretion on the issue. There's several things that need to be considered for the language. The first of these is when we were discussing this, part of the issue was allowing enough discretion because in terms of an illegal conversion, if somebody's caught in the middle of an illegal conversion, there needed to be a mechanism for them to file something in order to clean up the slash to be in compliance. And I think this language allows that discretion to the director. One thing, though, is that reading from the memo that Eric prepared, where a previous illegal conversion had occurred. So the one thing I think we're missing here is that we do not specify that an illegal conversion has occurred. It's sort of silent on it. I would suggest having something in there that says where a violation of Public Resources Code, Section 4601 et sequentia, has occurred or has been filed or whatever the appropriate language is, so that it is on file that the violation has occurred. If you see what I mean, the director doesn't just say, well, that looks like an illegal conversion to me. They have to actually violate the person so that the
Documentation
has occurred.
Yeah.
The other thing to consider here too is that under conversion exemptions, under the statute, there's one every 5 years. So perhaps there ought to be something that illuminates that fact, that it's something that's occurred within 5 years. I'm not sure how it would work for something that occurred 8 years ago. I'm still working that through in my mind, but you have this 5-year window for that. And that might confound things. So like, an illegal conversion may have occurred 8 years ago. That if you have this situation where it's the same landowner, are they entitled to a new conversion because it's been more than 5 years? You see what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm still not completely clear on that. My main point is that there ought to be a reference within 1104.1A that says where a violation of PRC 4601 has been issued by the director versus prior. Well, I'm just trying to tie it back to the exact PRC code to make it clear that it's for getting someone that has created a violation under the code. I'm not sure that that's entirely correct, Eric. I'm just saying that it has to be something that's tied to it. I agree with the intent of it.
So there are probably quite a few illegal conversions that haven't been issued violations out there, I imagine, because they're not known until there's a reason to hone in on it, perhaps. Or is that right? I mean, so.
Chairman Andre, Eric House, Cal Fire. I don't know that I have a good answer
Sorry,
to
Gary.
that question.
Yeah.
I can tell you that we've done a pretty good job of late.
Yeah.
Keeping up with the illegal conversions and the rise in illegal conversions. I would imagine there have been some that have slipped through the cracks. So with the advent of Google Earth, this was pretty easy to keep track of.
Yeah.
And I would just add, if I could, before I
Sure.
turn the podium over to Mr. Anderson. The department does agree with this notion of discretion. It's very important. We have had instances of illegal conversion occurring through trespass. And we certainly don't want to tie the hands of a landowner who, in good faith, had no prior knowledge or gave no consent for an illegal conversion that occurred on their property. We want them to have the opportunity to have a legal conversion, despite the fact that an illegal conversion is taking place on their property. So there are innumerable numbers of I think, exceptions to this that the director may have discretion.
How about the 5-year aspect?
Yeah, we need to dig deeper into that.
It's per parcel, but it has to be a new owner. Same owner gets one per lifetime.
Right. Is it so that it also is a new owner? You can't have one every 5 years for the same
cousin or a relative or
right.
All right. I'm here as a Buckeye Board of Director. I agree with George. There has to be some kind of an affirmative recognition that an illegal conversion has occurred. If I'm a landowner coming in buying a piece of land that's adjacent to my ranch and I want to build a barn on that and a line cabins, whatever, all of a sudden I get a notice that says you can't convert because there's been a previous conversion we picked up. And the way this reads, this conversion could have occurred since 1974. You pick it out on today's remote imagery, which is far better than it has been, and now it's more, especially in Humboldt County, you can get remote imagery and aerial photos very short frequency. So I think this needs to be focused, and it needs to somehow be conspicuous to a new owner that they may have restrictions on their ability to develop that property, especially where you're considering wildlands with ranching communities and timberlands mixed with AE lands. I think it's an important factor here.
Thank you. Okay, well, it's kind of shone a spotlight, and that's where I started with too, was the line, Section A, 11041A, to make sure we're clear, crystal clear on that part. I know the director has discretion there, but people buy and sell land all the time, and it'd be easy to stumble into a situation where there's a conversion, visible on air photo and 5 or 6 years ago, it never got permitted, and somebody bought a piece of property and wanted to build a house or barn or even place a conversion on all or a portion of that, the illegal one. I know somebody I know of somebody who's trying to do that to correct some of the other past situation. So what do we think about, what does staff think about the where there's a documentation of a violation, rather than just a visual estimate or ocular, view, that
We'd have to look into it a little bit more, but it sounds like your intent in developing, or the intent in developing this provision is to really, I guess, twofold, to address the bad actors who are willfully converting, and then to provide mechanisms to clean up previous illegal conversions. So I think that it would address both those things, but I think that the point that YG brings up about the statute of limitations regarding, or the statute of limitations issue regarding this subject might need to be looked at to see how well that can be enforced. But it's certainly something that we can look into.
I'm not even sure if this is I'm not even exactly positive, because it's a really interesting problem we need to look into, but penalties enforcement under 4601 are simply civil penalties, which are ultimately adjudicated by the board, and at times can take quite some time to work through. Depending on staffing levels, depending on caseloads of not just the department, but also administrative law judge and so on and so forth, because the hearings are conducted, they are conducted by an ALJ with a proposed decision being brought forward to this board for final adjudication. So there's a timeline associated with that. But the case reports that are associated with civil penalties are always predicated on essentially a violation being noted. So I'm not sure if applying it strictly to 4601 is appropriate, because that's going straight to the civil penalty process, but tying it back to a violation that's been issued by the director may be more appropriate, because then you're tying it back to a component part of a case report that the civil penalty is pursued, rather than it having to be the civil penalty process entirely. So that's something else I need to spend some time talking to myself, Eric, CAL FIRE.
Yeah. Because
Slayton, so on and so forth.
You could not accept it if there's something in process, maybe it hasn't reached its conclusion, but it just would still stall the acceptance of a brand new conversion exemption.
But a violation of the rules, that's a violation that's, although at that point, the lowest level of citation of a quote-unquote crime, but still a documentation by the department that the discretion that would be offered to the director could be considered, rather than the full civil penalty. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, this A section we might just need to have a little bit of refocus on it, and to bring that back, because I think there's enough popping up today that I'm not sure we can repair it or get the right language. I think you guys.
I don't think we could do that if we wanted to.
I just was pulling that out as an example. George Entry, California Forestry Association. I just pulled out the Public Resources Code as an example. If a violation has been issued, I think the director should have the discretion to suspend any acceptance of a conversion exemption pending the outcome of any kind of action that's being taken. I don't know exactly how to word that. I was only pointing to the Public Resources Code because that's the one thing I could concretely point to.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Huff?
Chairman Andre, Eric Huff, CAL FIRE. I am in agreement with all of the points that have been raised. I think Mr. Anderson's point about having a conspicuous bit of information for a prospective landowner coming onto a new piece of property to know what the limitations could be is hugely important. And as the YG and Mr. Diaz have pointed out, I think having a clear recognition by the department that those violations and issue that there's a violation of force practice active rules is important. And Mr. Diaz's point is quite valid that not every notice of violation generates a civil penalty action. So it would be more appropriate to have the notice of violation be the document that triggers this active discretion.
So, Chief Huff, can you work with our executive officer on between now and the next month, maybe to kind of maybe bring us refined language there, because that'll have to be in the ISOR too. I guess that the reason for that change and how it clarifies it, and with Mr. Hedge as well. Is that something you guys could?
Yeah, sure. Andre would be pleased to continue.
Because I think we're on the cusp of this. I think it's just going to take a little bit of research and effort. This committee member's good with all the other changes. You know, I'm fine with that. Was pretty much this was the tricky aspect. Yeah.
Seems like we're moving in the right direction.
Okay.
There is the one final issue of adding a provision that the conversation I had with OAL occurred late last week about that, adding a provision about where the department will provide contact information. So I can work with Chief Huff as well and talk about how it will be easiest for them to provide that information and then maybe bring something forward in the future. Or when we bring forward the changes to A.
Okay. Sounds good. That means we have nothing actionable for the full board tomorrow. So, that's okay. It's only March.
So just to be clear, so do you want them to prepare a list tonight to provide to you, but not to take to the full board tomorrow? Or
Oh, no. That.
On the PTEIR, would you prefer to have that as a potential actionable, the list being robust enough?
Oh, that's potentially actionable. That's true. Yeah. Because it would require the board to make. No, we have an actionable thing too on the Mountain Home extension too. So, yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I misspoke. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Any further input? Yeah, Mr. Huff, Chief Huff.
Chairman Andre, I just want to offer my appreciation for your work today as a single committee member. You took on a whole bunch of work and actually got work done. So I know from having worked with you in the past, that's the way you do business. But
Oh, yeah.
It's pretty impressive to have a lone committee member up here getting work done. So, outstanding.
Thank you. Well, it's so it's legal to have a committee member. We have one. I should have asked that question at 9 or 8:30, right? Okay. All right. Anybody online? No. Okay. Anybody want to address the committee before we adjourn in early? That's amazing. So covered a lot of ground, and there's some homework to do. And Forest Practice Committee is in this room, right? At 1 o'clock. So with that, the Management Committee is adjourned. Thank you.